Hello, Mark from Teacharium here. Today we're going to create a branching dialogue lesson. And the idea is that you're a paramedic and you arrive on a scene and you have to go through several decisions and then you get an outcome and some feedback at the end. So the first thing I think I want to do is go into one of my steps, and I've done a little bit of this already, and set up kind of what I want my steps to look like through the lesson. So I've gone in here and I've added a text box and I've added a navigation choice here. What a navigation choice does is that it has several buttons. If I look over here, I could expand this, and each of those buttons can have a step that it goes to, and then you can also put some actions with it. So the user will see these steps, they'll see a prompt up here, they'll have several options, they'll be able to click on one of those, and that'll navigate them to a different step. I threw a background image in, and also I threw a image in the right here, and this one I'm going to actually vary per step, so I didn't fill it in. So now that I have my template, I'm going to come back to the list view and save it as a template. I'm going to call it the decision step layout, and I'll use that later. Now, something else I've already been working on is the abstract for my lesson. This is a document that describes everything that I want in my lesson. So if we take a quick look at the different parts we have, I start off with a general statement telling us what we're building. I have some style information about which template to use and how long responses should be, and that sort of thing. And then I actually get into the meat of the lesson. So here's our scenario. You're a paramedic, your ambulance arrives at a home, blah, blah, blah. And then I have each of my steps listed out kind of as a decision point. So here's my decision one, arriving on scene. There's some prompt here. And then I have 3 different options that I'm going to want it to do. And I go ahead and put in which step I want it to go to from here. And this is just, this is just an open document. It's a narrative of what I want to build. And some of these options, I have extra things besides just the step that we want to transition to. And that's because I want to record some things along the way. And Teacharium has a variable system, so you can create variables and set those. So what we're going to do here is, on this first decision, if they pick this second option here, I want to give them the scene control bonus. So I'll create a variable and save it there, and then at the end I can use that to evaluate how the learner did. I have several other steps with decisions about where they go. Some of these are good choices, some of these are bad choices. Our last step here transitions to 3 different ending screens depending on which option they choose in it. And those ending screens are going to give us some summary information. After the ending screens, I actually want to go to a wrap-up screen that gives some detailed information about how you did. So for that, we need to utilize the lesson variables to figure out what to tell the user. Here's a table where it lists all my variables, where they're set, and what the variable is for. And while I was writing this document, I actually wrote the top portion, but then the AI was able to extract all this and generate this much for me, so it was very helpful. Here's my wrap-up screen. There's a little bit of information here about the wrap-up screen, but then I have a table about the feedback that I want. So here are each of my variables, and then I have a column if that variable is true, and a column if that variable is false. So if you get the scene control bonus true, you're going to get this feedback here, and if scene control bonus is false, you're going to get this feedback here. And then some of them don't have any feedback, and so on. And that's how I've set up my abstract to understand the structure of my lesson and how it should be built. Now I'm going to go back into my list view. I'm actually going to get rid of this initial section because we don't need that anymore. We saved that step off to our template already. And I'm going to ask the AI to create my variables and scaffold my lesson. What the AI is going to do is going to use my abstract to go ahead and figure out what should be done. And since we gave a pretty detailed abstract, it's going to get us pretty far along the way. So now if I go look at my variables tab here, I can see that it created all those variables that were listed in my abstract. They're all set to false initially, which is what we wanted. And then if I look in my list view here, I can see that it's created sections for each of the major parts of my lesson, and then steps within it that follow my abstract. So I'm going to go back to my AI chat, and I'm going to go into this first step. Now, as you can see, there's nothing in this step because we've only scaffolded out the structure of the lesson so far. We haven't actually started building it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and generate my first step. I'm going to make sure to tell it to use our template. So it's going to go ahead and apply that template. And then it's going to start up the generate step agent. This is a specialized agent that knows a lot more about how to actually manipulate the things within a step. As we can see, we have our template. It's gone ahead and filled in our prompt and our different options. If I look over here, it tells us that it did set that scene control variable that we had mentioned back in our abstract. So this is looking pretty good. I'm going to save and close that. And here it is in our editor. If I were to click on these navigation options, I can open these up and see that it actually set the right steps for it to go to. Then if I go to step choice 2 here, I can open up the actions and make sure it's actually setting the variable that I wanted it to set, which is all looking good. Obviously, I could do any of this stuff manually through the UI. I don't have to use the AI to make these changes. So now that that worked, I think I'm going to tell it to go ahead and do the rest of the decision steps. So the first thing it's going to do is apply the templates to all the steps. We'll let it do that. And then it's going to go ahead and try to generate the content for those steps. When you're generating content for a whole bunch of steps like this window here pops up for each of them. It's kind of stacked on each one. So we're actually looking at the very last step right now. When this finishes and I hit save, we'll be able to see the one before that and the one before that and so on and so forth. We can see that it's gone through. It's added in our prompt and our options. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then look at the next one. That's looking pretty close. And usually how I do it is, as long as it looks good here, I save and close it. And then I make any changes back in the step editor. Sometimes I'll have to ask for small changes to be made there. So now we should have all of our steps created. If I come over here to the flow map, I should be able to see the flow through my lesson. So we have the arriving on screen step. It's either going to come way down here or go this way to the gathering info. Yeah, this is exactly the flow that I had described in my abstract. And then we have the shock with the different outcomes. So I noticed that our outcomes have weird nexts to each other. I think we didn't actually generate those yet. Let me edit that, and yeah, see, it's just empty still. So let's go ahead and generate our ending screens. Now right now I'm just kind of really quickly creating a lesson. If I was doing this for real and really wanted to get to a production quality, I would probably have 2 or 3 different templates for our steps, so there's some variation between them. You know, maybe I have a layout with the image on the left, or maybe without an image. Maybe I would work with some of the transitions so that the items slide in or something. But really the goal today is to give you a quick understanding of how to make a lesson like this. So here's my ending screen. It's got a navigation choice with a single entry. That's exactly what we wanted. So the last thing we have to do is the wrap-up screen. And I'm not going to use the template there. And this was the screen that we were going to have the different text options that either display or don't display, depending on the choices that you made within the lesson. So let's go ahead and generate that. As you can see, it's a pretty big prompt because it has all of our different feedback options and variable conditions and stuff in it. All right, it's gone through and it's added those different text blocks for me. Again, you know, if I was doing a real production level lesson here, I would probably do this a little bit prettier, probably with a grid and with cards in them so that each card kind of displays or don't displays. And maybe the cards would have different border colors depending on whether it was a positive or a negative. But let's take a quick look at how this works. So here's a text block. You can see there's a little not visible due to conditions tag on it. If I come over here to the options and scroll all the way down, we have this visible conditions section. And this determines whether or not this text block that I have selected is going to be displayed or not. And what we have here is a little hard to read, but you can see it has the scene control bonus variable, and when it's true, this text is going to be displayed. If I was authoring this fresh, I could use this little drop down here to find all my different variables and get them in there. So at the end of our lesson, this is going to go through, and this one, if the scene control is true, it's going to display, and this one, if the scene control is false, it's going to display. So the end user will only see one of these, either the positive or the negative feedback from that. If you remember from our abstract, some of them only had positive feedbacks and some of them only had negative feedbacks. But hopefully this shows you how you can pretty easily do conditional feedback using that kind of system. So the last thing I want to do is go through my different steps and fill these images in. This is going to be a manual task as we pick the different images. I've previously gone and picked out a few that I thought might fit in well. Okay, now that I've added the images in, let's go ahead and play our lesson and see what it looks like. Here's my first step. This is the arriving on scene. It's asking me what I want to do. I think for this playthrough, I'm going to kind of play with optimal choices. So for this one, calmly asking the wife to step back and then approaching is the optimal choice. We'll click on that, and then at the patient side, the correct response here is kind of the check responsiveness. So we'll go and do that. If there's no normal breathing, I'm going to go ahead and begin CPR and tell my partner to get the AED. From there, I'm going to go ahead and tell my partner to apply the pads, and I'm going to keep compressions going with CPR. At some point, the AD advises a shock, so we're going to go ahead and do that immediately. And we got to the ending the good outcome. There's probably a better title that the learner could have seen there, but you get the idea. So we got through our little decision tree. We can proceed to the debrief screen and get that wrap up. And here we are. I kind of did everything right, so the scene control has a check, and all of these are the positive feedbacks that I would have received. Let's go ahead and try again, and we'll make less than optimal choices. Here's my initial decision point. Instead of getting right to the patient, I'm going to ask the wife what happened. She gives me some information, but I'm going to keep asking questions. When did he last eat? That sounds good. And at this point, this is kind of a dead end in the dialogue, so she just becomes hysterical, and I continue to the flow where we're assessing the patient. Here we have the same prompt as before. I'm going to go straight to checking the pulse instead of checking responsiveness. And then from there, I'm going to start CPR, but you know what? He's looking fine. We're not going to need the AED. We probably could have had a better image here that didn't actually have it in the screen yet. So we're doing compressions, things are going okay, but then we realize we really are going to need that AED. So we're going to pause those compressions, apply the pads, and analyze the rhythm. At this point, the AED advises shock. So I'm going to ask my partner, do you really think that we should do this? And then we get to the delayed outcome. So there were several hesitations that we had. This screen actually is only based on that last one. We could have made a more complicated flow where all of the decisions add up to the outcome, but we're trying to keep it simple for this time. And we'll go to our debrief, and we can see that I have the negative feedback for I guess all of these because I made the kind of incorrect choices throughout the lesson. And that is how you can create a branching dialogue-based system within Teacharium.